Welcome, flip clock fans. We have a Montgomery Ward flip clock radio here. It's called the Montgomery Ward Airline FM/AM digital remote control clock radio. And what's this all about? We're going to learn about it. We're going to learn about Montgomery Wards and a little bit about this clock. It is the model GN1983B Montgomery Ward Airline. Montgomery Ward & Company was one of the earliest mail-order businesses and later a leading department store chain that operated between 1872 and 2001. There are no longer any operating brick-and-mortar Montgomery Ward outlets. In 2004, the brand name Montgomery Ward was bought out and relaunched as an online retailer, which can be found at www.wards.com. Airline was Montgomery Ward's brand of electronics and musical instruments. The name arose in the 1930s when Montgomery Ward began selling radios in its mail-order catalog using the brand name Airline. The name has nothing to do with air travel, but was a play on the concept of radio airwaves. Subsequent products branded Airline included radios, televisions, record players, guitars, and amplifiers. In the early 2000s, Eastwood Guitars acquired the rights to use the Airline brand name, which is still in use today. Thankfully, I found this clock in the 1973 Christmas Montgomery Ward catalog. And there we find out that the clock is not remotely controlled. It is a remote control. You have a separate unit that you can plug in somewhere else in your home, plug in a TV, light, whatever, and set it off by pushing the button or setting the timer to set the remote to turn on. And after 1973, there was no more details about the clock. Looks like it did not catch on. In 2020, what appears to be a new in-box clock showed up, which had the manual as well as the receiver. So we know at least the clock came in wood grain and white. In this manual, it goes into detail on how to set the clock and use it as a remote control. Later that same year, a remote unit was found on eBay. I did not get any of these things. I got this clock later, after all this. So now that we know a little bit about this clock, we're going to look at this. You see how messed up that is? They've really messed up the top. The button works, you push it and the light comes on. That's about all it's going to do for us. These switches seem to be okay. The volume is really scratchy. Now, I can't let you listen to that radio because I'll get dinged. Believe it or not, it'll get a copyright strike. Well, there's the remote switch. You can set the remote off by the button pushing itself or by setting it off from the timer from the clock, just like an alarm. The clock flips fine, although it's not flipping by itself. You see how filthy that is? So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to clean all that up and get a clock like this running again, or a similar clock. You look here and you see a lot of this brown glue and stuff. They really went crazy with that stuff. Now what we're also doing here is we always film a clock before we start working at it to see the lay of the land, to see how the wires are set up. And it help us if we get in a bind when we're trying to put things back together. But eventually we get it apart, and here's the mechanism. I'm going to leave that circuit board attached. See, it's got those two chiclet looking things. I think that's part of the remote control. I've never seen anything like that before. Here's our light. Now I'm going to have to replace that light. It burnt out, believe it or not. And this speaker is just glued in. I've taken the brackets off, but it's still stuck. So we've got everything lined out here. There is a risk of shock when you're messing with this if you plug it in, which we are going to do in a second. Now here's the motor. The first thing we're going to need to address to see if we can get this functioning as a flip clock. The light, it's doing okay, so I'm not going to mess with that. This bottom, I'm going to leave all these wires attached because I'm going to clean that by hand instead of dunk it in water because there's some labels on the bottom. I do not want to risk losing those labels. So I'm going to leave all that attached. We got the speaker off and you can see it's filthy. And by this time I can tell someone did not take care of this clock. Something was spilled in there. I don't think it damaged the speaker. But it did get into the components and it messed up the tuner knob because the tuner knob is real hard to turn. Now we're going to clean this up with soap, water, and some ammonia, like some Windex to get that smoke out of there. But now, again, for the most important thing, we're going to turn our attention to this motor. I'm going to do it almost in real time so that you can see really how quickly you can get a motor going if it's just a simple matter of needing lubrication. So if you've got a clock, it could be a GE, it could be a Copal, it could be a Panasonic, but most of those and a lot of those use these type of motors. I'm using a 5.5 millimeter socket if you're wondering. Makes life a lot easier. Now I want to show you something. I think it's really cool. When you've got a clock that's really filthy on the inside, it'll often set up a pattern inside of this shroud here. It's a swirl pattern. I just think that's really cool. It's really detailed looking too. It's like art. So first off, you can see this is really, really stiff when I try to turn it. That should be spinning, like fast, and it should just keep spinning. So later, after lubrication, we'll try that again and see what we can do. So again, the first part of this I'm going to do real time so you can see what it's like. And I've done this many times before on other videos, but it's important. Someone might just be seeing this for the first time. It's not that hard. You want to get a good light oil. It actually doesn't matter what kind of oil you use. You want to use oil though. You don't want to use WD-40. You drop that oil down to the back side. It'll go down to the axle there. Now that's an axle. There's no ball bearings in there. It's just a simple axle that goes straight through the clock into that motor casing. And you start turning it. And you just kind of work that oil in. You're thinking about getting that oil down in there. And you can see how stiff it is. Oh, you see it started to move. We're just going to keep trying to work that oil down there. There it goes. Now it's not done yet, although it is working and it will operate. If the rest of the clock is in good shape, it will flip the clock. Now hopefully it does flip, because that's going to tell us that it's just the motor. So instead of the gearbox being messed up, which is a pain, it's just the motor. Okay, so now we're going to really finish lubricating this clock. We're going to get the clock set up, make sure nothing's touching any of the electrical components. We're going to let this run for a while. You can see I've let it run for a little while already. And several times I'll just drop some more oil down through there. And we're going to let that run for maybe half a day or a day. You see here, look at the difference. That's perfect. Now we're going to turn our attention to these switches. Now this is the tuner knob. I've already fixed that. I do think something fell down in there. I had to wipe some stuff off the top. I took this E-clip off, pulled that up, did not get the string off of it, put some new grease in there, and it's smooth as silk. Now these type of switches, often the only thing that's going to be wrong with these clocks is one of these switches. We're going to use this deoxide. One of these switches might be needed to be cleaned, and it's usually the AM/FM. If you got a clock radio that's not working, you find the AM/FM knob, switch that back and forth. Then we're going to lubricate the volume, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So often, lubricating the volume, this is right here, and on the back side, that's called a potentiometer. Getting those cleaned and lubricated is often the only thing you'll need to do. Like in 90% of your old clocks, believe it or not. So you're just going to work that back and forth, and then after a while, you could blow some of that out with compressed air. I'm going to get this set up. Got my little helper there, brought me some water. And that's to clean these with. Some people will wonder what to clean it with. They'll think about using alcohol or ammonia. You really don't want to do that, and you don't need soap. You're just going to use water on a Q-tip. And I'm going to clean each tile, each and every tile. This does take some time, and I don't want to get it too soaked. It's worse than you'd think. I'm going to go through each tile. Just get the edges as best I can. And then sometimes I wipe it off with the back side of that too, so it's not overly wet. Now once you've done this, the tiles will stick together for a while. Don't worry about that. That'll resolve itself. Now it's good to have some supervision when you're doing this. Some people got some good ideas, but you want to stick with the water. It just takes time. Now this is 30 minutes later. I went straight through just to see how long it would take me, because I knew someone might wonder or might ask. It took me 30 minutes to do the whole clock. So you go through all the minutes, then you have to go through all the hours. Now for the speaker, you want a medium to soft brush, and you want to take your time. And I can see there is some stuff. It looks like someone spilled something in there. It's going to be okay. And eventually, I get it pretty clean. Turn our attention to the top. Whatever they spilled on there, I've washed it off with soap and water and a light scrub brush, and they've damaged the top. Now what I'm going to show you, I probably wouldn't recommend in most cases, but it's going to be the only way I can smooth that out a little bit. We're going to use the semichrome polish. I'm not going to get real heavy-handed on it, so I'm just going to try to smooth that out, try to get that garbage off of there. Seriously, you don't want to do this on wood grain. But it seemed to be the only option to get this done. And here's our swirly pattern, our swirly gig. So we got it all cleaned inside and out. The top turned out pretty good. It probably messed up the wood grain a little bit. I wouldn't recommend doing that. And you don't want to use alcohol in there. And so here's the end result. We've got the clock cleaned up. The top actually turned out really good. The radio works great. I can't let you hear it though. It's smooth. Everything's working great. All the switches are working. So you can see here it messed up the pattern a little bit, but it doesn't really look that bad. It looks a lot better than it did because it had damaged that. So what I did to make it shine again was I used this Renaissance microcrystalline wax polish. I think it's the best thing you can use. You could use Armor All or something like that, but now I did have to replace that light. Here's the old light. Just in running the clock, it burnt it out. And I do have some vintage bulbs that are very similar that I replaced it with. So there it is, the Montgomery Ward Airline model GEN 1983B. You can see the before and the after. Thanks for taking the time.